Daniela Schneiderig. I'm a senior program lead with Global Partners Digital, or GPD, and I'm also an advisory board member at the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, or GFCE. So I will be your moderator today, and we've got an impressive lineup of speakers. But before we jump in, I would like to make a couple of housekeeping announcements to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So first off, this is a basic one. We know this from the last year working virtually, but please keep your mics muted unless it's your turn to speak. The heads up, Cara just mentioned that the session will be recorded, so it can be posted, and people who couldn't attend today can watch it at their own pace. So just a heads up. And also feel free to tweet about the session and share on your social media. We'll be using the hashtags cyber capacity and cyber policy engagement, but you can use those or any others that you would like. And yeah, so to start today, so the focus for today's session is to discuss stakeholder engagement in cyber policy making. And the idea for this session came about through discussions with our colleagues about how really calls for inclusive cyber policy making have been growing quite a lot in the past few years. And we've got a landscape where a free, open, and secure cyberspace is intrinsically linked to social and economic development, and really a need for an online environment that we as individuals can trust, and where we can operate safely and exercise our rights and enjoy our freedoms. So we've got that, but then in parallel, we do also have this landscape with cyber threats, which are growing in number, and they're becoming more complex and more severe. And this has brought about even more complex policy challenges, and it's brought to the fore really an urgency and the need for countries to become more proactive in the face of these threats. So to add to this complex context, enter the COVID-19 pandemic, which has, I think, shown all of us the clear need to have a strategic approach to address cybersecurity threats. So cybersecurity strategies have become really a focused tool for governments to strategically address a broad range of issues and policy concerns. And perhaps for those of you who are not too familiar with national cybersecurity strategies, they are essentially a framework that a country develops that will allow the country to hopefully coordinate better and mitigate against the impact of cyber attacks, and really foster a more secure and safe cyberspace in a sustainable way. And so with strategies and cyber policies becoming then even more important, I think it has become quite clear that we need expertise from a very broad range of stakeholders to inform the development and the implementation and review of cybersecurity strategies and policies. And so over the last few years, there have been efforts made by several organizations to involve stakeholders in cyber policy making processes, including the organizations that we've got joining us today, and also in international spaces like the GFCE, for example. So that is what we'll be discussing today. And we've got a group of brilliant speakers who represent different stakeholder groups, and they all have experience with cybersecurity strategies and cyber policy making more broadly. So they will be sharing their insight with us about how they see stakeholder engagement as a way to promote a free, open, and secure cyberspace. Also, what are some of the concrete modalities and ways in which stakeholders can be engaged in cyber policy development, and what are some of the challenges that the pandemic has brought about, and perhaps some innovative solutions to address those challenges. So we've got roughly 90 minutes overall for today's session, a little bit less now that we've started. So we're going to kick off with some initial interventions from our experts of no more than 5 to 7 minutes each. And then I will be asking our experts some questions, and we'll discuss some reflections around these topics. After which we're going to be opening up the discussion to everyone else, and we would love to hear your thoughts and questions. So we encourage you to start dropping any questions that you might have on the chat, and we will get to them later in the session. So Without further ado, let's kick off. And I'm going to go first. And I know I'm technically the moderator, but I'll also be sharing a very brief intervention because I would like to share with you a bit about my organization's work promoting inclusive cyber policy making. And as I mentioned, my organization is called Global Partners Digital, or GPD, and we're a civil society organization. We're based in the UK, but work with partners around the world. And we focus on fostering a digital environment that is underpinned by human rights. And in our cyber work in particular, we see that interplay between human rights and cyber, and how strong cybersecurity is key to be able to exercise our rights online. And this is something that has become more and more apparent in these current circumstances. But we also focus on understanding how can we foster a cyberspace where those threats that we were just talking about that are very real and getting more complex, how can we tackle those threats in a way that is efficient and that is robust whilst keeping cyberspace free and open? And this is a very complex challenge, and there is no one size fits all solution. That's, in general, there's no silver bullet for cybersecurity. However, we see two key needs. That's what we focus our work on. And first of all, we see the need for cybersecurity laws and policies to be human rights respecting by design. And we also see the need for cybersecurity laws and policies that are developed in an inclusive way. And we see these two going hand in hand. And the more inclusive a process is, the more likely it is that human rights perspectives will be reflected in those discussions. So in line with this, we have developed a toolkit for inclusive and value-based cyber policy making. And the toolkit has three components. The first one is a guide where we aim to provide guidance to policymakers on how to engage stakeholders in the development, implementation, or review of a national cybersecurity strategy. And the guidance that we provide in this guide reflects really the learnings and takeaways from working with partners in different countries over the last 6 years. And so then the second element is an interactive map, which tracks the state of play of cyber policy in countries in the Commonwealth. And the third and last element is a repository of good practices, which is essentially a database where we've been collecting examples of cybersecurity processes where stakeholders were engaged. And we hope that by gathering those examples and showcasing how they actually worked in practice, there will be other countries who perhaps are about to start a process or are currently in the process of developing a strategy, and they might feel inspired to consider adapting and tailoring some of the modalities included to their specific context. So, as I mentioned before, the map and the repository are both focused on countries in the Commonwealth, and that's because we developed it as part of a project supported by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the FCDO. We will be looking to grow the repository as well and expand it to other countries. So I believe Cara will be sharing the link for the toolkit on the chat box if it's not already. So do feel free to check it out. And if you have any thoughts on how to improve it or make it grow more, do let me know. We're always open to that feedback. There's also a form where you can submit examples for the repository as well. So if there's an example that comes to mind that you would like to see featured there, feel free to submit it as an example through that form. And so I'm going to stop there with my intervention. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat and we will get to them later in the session. So I would like to invite our first speaker of the day, Ntabiseng Pule, who is the project coordinator and outreach manager for the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa, also known as C3SA. And the center has been carrying out the CMM assessments in the region. And Ntabiseng will be sharing with us some insights and reflections from carrying out those CMM reviews now online for the past year, and what are some of the differences to the in-person engagement. So Ntabi, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Ntabise Mpule, and I am the Outreach and Project Manager for the Southern African Center, Capacity Center for Southern Africa, sorry. We have been doing CMMs for the past year. We did 2 directly, and we also had another one done by other collaborators, and we have insights from that. These 2 are Malawi, and these 3 are Malawi, Somalia, and Uganda. So we'll be sharing experiences from those 3, which were all done online. But before I proceed to the experiences, perhaps we can talk about the benefits of having a CMM conducted in a country from a stakeholder's perspective. Because for stakeholders to be engaged, they need to understand what the benefit is. So from an evaluation that was conducted in 2020, it was found that the CMM actually drives the increase in cybersecurity awareness and capacity building around cybersecurity. And it also helps contribute to the involvement of or collaboration between government and other stakeholders. And it enables networking between different stakeholders in a country. And it helps the government to define the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders around cybersecurity. And it also helps to drive funding for cybersecurity initiatives in the country. But if engagement happened online, it's only because it has not been possible to do it through the physical mode that has been the norm until the pandemic struck last year in 2020. So typically a CMM would be conducted in a physical venue. The government agent would be responsible for arranging the venue and everything that is needed for the stakeholders to do the meetings, to attend meetings and everything. Then it came time to move the CMM online because not doing it didn't seem to be an option. So with the CMM online came several changes. The first change was that it wasn't a single venue anymore because each participant now had to do it from a different venue. People were no longer going to offices or live conferences. So connecting from home, especially in the African context, can have its own challenges, which the organizer has to be aware of. One challenge is the connectivity, whether people, wherever they are supposed to join the meeting from, they have got internet access and they have the necessary means to pay for it, because data in Africa is not always affordable for everyone. Now, having sorted out the connectivity issue becomes the digital platform that will be used to host the meeting. Often it will be something like Zoom as we are on it now, or it can be others. It cannot be assumed that everybody knows how to use the same platform or they have used it before. And maybe sometimes some platforms even need installation. So people have to be aware of that and do the installation well ahead of time, so that if there are any issues, they know how to sort those issues before the meeting starts. And then there's also the protocols that the meeting adopts. Some meetings may choose that people will not use video, or video will be used if possible. Each has its own benefit. Having video off, it was found that sometimes, depending on our cultures, of course, it can make it more attractive for people to participate because they're not afraid to be observed, and they feel free generally when they're just talking behind a wall, if I can call it behind a wall. But video also has the benefits because facial expression sometimes can tell the moderator that maybe I didn't ask a question that people understand. so then they can rephrase or something. But if there's no video, it means maybe they will listen to the silence and observe that maybe I didn't clarify the question, so I need to go again, things like that. So an observant moderator is also key, whether we have the video on or off. The advantage of the video off, of course, is also for people who find it difficult to connect with high-speed internet access. It means it's easier for them to connect. It's also cheaper if people are using pay-as-you-go packages for connecting to the internet. Now, when we deploy the CMM online, attendance is something that has to be taken very good care of, as I have already indicated, sorting out the connectivity and also sorting out the platform. But apart from that, there's also the question of language. Participants do not always speak the same language as the moderators. And when it's online, even if it would have been possible to understand each other better if we were in a single venue, in a room. Sometimes when the connection is not very good and the language differences are also there, it can be difficult for the participants and the moderators to understand each other. So we have sometimes had to display the questions on a screen so that participants can at least read for themselves what the question says, so that then they can respond. They can even respond in the chat, because that way it becomes easier to communicate. But the means to communicate is very important once people have gathered to participate in the CMM. So when you compare the two, with the CMM online, you don't have the benefit of going on tea break and having people chat and network. And I think that's one sad thing about the CMM online, because some of the things that were talked about during the discussion, another person who had been shy to say anything in the meeting may point to something that can then be carried back to the meeting for clarifications. But with the online, it's not possible to have such interactions. So I believe I have covered all the challenges and the benefits of having the CMM online and having the CMM all together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really liked some of the points that you made, and yeah, some things that we might sometimes take for granted, questions around connectivity and accessibility to these technologies, and even knowing how to use a platform. We can't assume that people will know how to use it, and that can make meaningful engagement a bit more difficult, but it's also an opportunity if we know that we need to take these things into consideration to build that into any virtual engagement that we do. So thank you so much for your intervention, Tabi. So next, I would like to invite Geraldine Mugumya. Geraldine is a risk analyst at the National Information Technology Authority of Uganda, or NITA for short, and she is a fellow of the Women in International Security in Cyberspace Fellowship, and she will be sharing with us some learnings and reflections from engaging with stakeholders across sectors. So Geraldine, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela, for that warm introduction, and greetings to all the participants. So I'll be talking about engaging with stakeholders across sectors, and I'll specifically share how, as NITA, we engaged stakeholders during the recent cybersecurity capacity review of Uganda, which happened last year. So the first thing that we did was to identify the key stakeholders, and here we looked at who are the key players within the public sector, within the private sector, and also civil society. And here we didn't only look at maybe say want to look at technical experts. We look both at policy, those who handle the policies, and also those who have the technical expertise in this area. So initially, we were supposed to have this engagement face-to-face physical meeting, but due to the pandemic, we had to shift to have this process online. So based on the responses that we got from the invitation letters that we had sent out to the different stakeholders, the team, we engaged them and informed the stakeholders of this new format that we're going to have the CMM review online. And we emphasize how important their input and also expertise is in this process. So and also we highlighted that having their their input, it helps us to be able to identify areas that we can enhance against the domains that are found within the cybersecurity maturity model. So before we had these online discussions, we kind of we shared information of what was going to take place on the online discussion in the different groups, and just to kind of give them a pace of this is what's going to happen. We would like your input in this, and this is how it's going to go, and also just to maintain the trust and transparency between NITA and the stakeholders. We were always part of all those online discussions. You can just speak as the quiet person and let the stakeholders share their input. And maybe when they haven't understood or need some clarification, then as NITA, we come in and engage them and say, oh no, this is what the experts require information from you. So there are some challenges during this online session that Untitled had shared, but I believe that didn't deter us from completing this process, and we actually successfully managed to first time we're doing something online, and we successfully did it. Yes. So with that, that's just my highlight of engaging stakeholders across sectors. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Geraldine. Yeah, I think that's really key. Some of the points that you made around transparency and clear processes and sharing the information beforehand to help stakeholders prep, and that can help their engagement be actually meaningful, as opposed to just a tick box exercise. Something else that you said that I thought was really useful to highlight is the need to identify the key stakeholders and the key players, and how you went through that mapping. And there may be actors that haven't necessarily been involved before but should, or could bring great value to the process. So going through that process, as opposed to just inviting the usual experts that engage in these processes, I thought that was super interesting and really useful to highlight. So thank you so much for your thoughts, Geraldine. And I would now like to give the floor to Cynthia Wright. Cynthia is a retired US military officer. She's got over 25 years of experience in national security, cyber strategy, and policy. She is currently a principal cyber strategy and policy lead for the MITRE Corporation, where she co-developed MITRE's framework for assessing and building the cyber capacity of partner nations. And this framework has been used by the US State Department in support of numerous partner nations and regional organizations in West Africa, Central and South America, the Indo-Pacific, and Eastern Europe. So Cynthia will be sharing with us some insights from moving online and doing stakeholder engagement online from MITRE's perspective. So Cynthia, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We all have to start with that question these days, don't we? I wanted to just start by reiterating how important stakeholder involvement is. MITRE, in the model that you just mentioned in your introduction, MITRE's model for helping countries develop their cyber strategies and implement them, we have a category that's called strategic foundations, and strategic foundations are considered those things that are sort of prerequisite to being able to make progress in other cyber strategy areas. And one of the most important of those is stakeholder involvement, identifying your stakeholders and their interests and creating those mechanisms for them to participate in not just policy development, but in the entire ecosystem that goes with cyber capacity building, understanding threats, identifying goals, identifying common interests and shared needs, figuring out what the opportunities are to better not just move processes online, not just digitize processes, but through digitizing processes to make them better, stronger, greater outreach, more resilience, those kinds of things. And understanding the perspectives and limitations and needs of different stakeholders just makes all of those things better and stronger. Policy made in a vacuum is not typically embraced well. And if it's not embraced, it's harder to enforce. And it also misses some important constraints or ideas that might have been brought to the table had the experts in those areas been consulted. So I just can't overstate the importance of stakeholder involvement. And as everyone so far has noted, that's become more difficult lately because of the pandemic and the need to social distance and not meet. So many of our activities are moving online, and we weren't necessarily prepared for that. We didn't necessarily have the tools in place when it started. We didn't have the habits in place when it started. And I think that governments around the world, individuals around the world in different companies, different industries, critical infrastructure, have been learning how to do pretty much the entirety of their business operations, their mission operations remotely. So that has created its own challenges and also its own advantages. I think we typically think of this as making stakeholder involvement harder, and it does to some degree, but it can bring some advantages too. On the one hand, it is a little harder to establish trust online for people, especially for people you don't already know. If you haven't already established those relationships across your government or with those stakeholders, then doing that from scratch online can be difficult. But on the other hand, the ability to convene participants that you otherwise would have had a hard time bringing to the table is much greater. In some cases, desired participants might have lived far away, or it just might not be very feasible for them to come, say, across town, if that means an hour and a half driving or some other kind of transportation. So in the past, it might have been easier to just leave those stakeholders out of discussions. But if we can meet online, then there's really no reason that everyone can't be equally involved. It's a really good opportunity to bring in people who ordinarily would have just been logistically difficult or too inconvenient. So this is an opportunity if we choose to take it. It also lets you add experts that you might otherwise not have had access to. If you're having a kind of a routine policy meeting and you know it's going to address a particular topic, you might not have brought in, say, an international expert to your meetings and discussions. But in this environment, that is something that can be done. You can add expertise that you ordinarily wouldn't have been able to bring into these kinds of discussions. Of course, what that does highlight is the need for connectivity. If basic connectivity isn't in place, then this kind of environment makes collaboration extraordinarily difficult. So this has kind of put the spotlight a little bit on having reliable, secure, extensive internet connectivity for participants. Talking just a little bit about how governments and, well, MITRE and some of the people we work with have done stakeholder engagement online. Obviously, Zoom is a key tool for everybody in the whole world at the moment, or something like it. We haven't used Microsoft Teams mostly, but I've become way too familiar with way too many virtual online meeting tools lately, and that's been hugely important. I think one thing that gets overlooked sometimes about Zoom meetings or virtual meetings like this is the need to kind of compensate for the fact that you're not in person and build in a little bit of extra time for personal engagement to, you know, see how the weather is, where that person is and what they're doing, and comment on the fact that their cat keeps coming through the picture. I never knew that so many of my work coworkers had cats until the pandemic. But having those little side conversations can help establish those relationships that you ordinarily would do over coffee, or that you ordinarily would do, you know, prior to the meeting. And I would also just encourage people to take advantage of that, even when they're first starting with stakeholder engagement, when they're first meeting people that they haven't dealt with before. Because in some of the countries that we've worked with, many of the stakeholders don't necessarily get along. They may, in some cases, in some countries, be pretty much openly adversarial. In fact, they have never met in person. They would never meet in person if they had the choice. And if they did meet, they'd sit across the room. They wouldn't talk to each other. But on a Zoom meeting, you know, you see things or have an opportunity to engage about topics that are different, and you are all sitting right next to each other on the, you know, on the screen, and it does shifts the dynamic a little bit. And for policymakers who are really interested in developing those stakeholder relationships, you know, take advantage of that. Pull on those threads and try and let people see the connectivities, the connectivity and the common life experiences that they have that can help break down some barriers. A couple other tools we've used are tools like Mural that let you act like you have a virtual whiteboard. That's been super useful. And then it's already been mentioned that we've had to move some of our assessments online. We've typically preferred to do in-person interviews. We've had to do those remotely over the phone, and that is more difficult. There's translation issues. There's more misunderstanding because you can't read body language. You can't tell when there's more to draw out, especially if there's not video. But there are still things that we can do. It is still possible to engage stakeholders, and in some cases even be a little more productive. So I would just give one little best practice before I stop talking. And that would be to, especially if you're doing outreach to stakeholders for kind of the first time, if you don't have those relationships established, if not everybody understands the topic in the same way or in the same depth, then it's useful to kind of plan those engagements in threes, I think. The first one to meet and introduce the topic and explain why it's important, and to let people understand what your framing is, so that when they see the materials, they don't apply their own interpretations to it. They take it in the spirit in which it is intended, right? And then send those materials out, give people a chance to process them, be open to answering questions, and making sure that everyone truly understands where you're coming from, and then meet again with a longer session planned to let people really have the discussion, and have those chat windows open so that people can ask questions that they, you know, especially if they're shy or something, they might not ordinarily have reached out in a meeting, but in a Zoom meeting, in a chat, they can get those questions out there and really make an effort to address those. So that would be kind of my little tip for effective stakeholder engagement. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to the next person.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And yeah, I really, really liked your intervention. Really like the fact that stakeholder engagement is seen as, you know, one of the strategic foundations within your framework, and it shows that it is indeed, you know, a prerequisite to make progress in other areas, and not just like this, you know, standalone isolated thing, or like a tick box exercise, but actually, you know, it's something much more holistic than that. So I really liked that comment, and completely agree with the fact, you know, that it's important to know that we're still people, and we want that connection and that personal engagement, and you know, the conversations that sometimes we would get you know, in between breaks or by the coffee can actually really help build trust. So trying to replicate that in some way or another, and sort of combat that Zoom fatigue that I think many of us, you know, by now can sometimes experience. I think that's really interesting. So thank you so much. And I would now like to give the floor to Carrie Ann Barrett, and she's the cybersecurity policy specialist at the cybersecurity program with the Organization of American States, or OAS. And in her role, she offers technical assistance to member states in the development and implementation of their national cybersecurity strategies. And she also assists with the implementation of various technical capacity building initiatives within the cybersecurity program. So I would like to invite Carrie Ann to share some thoughts with us on how to do coordination of stakeholders in general, but also virtually. How have you found it from the OAS perspective?
Thanks, Danny. And good afternoon, morning, and evening to everyone. I think my job is kind of hard now because the speakers before have done such a great job in going through their experiences and the challenges that we're now seeing, especially, I wouldn't even say COVID is a challenge more than an opportunity. It has allowed us, especially for consultation. So I think what I'll try to do is still run through and kind of sum up what everyone has said, and to give some practical examples to everyone on the call on how we have continued to be engaging with our member states. And another aspect is to be honest that because this is so new to all of us, it's a constant learning curve and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. So just to kind of remind everyone with the intro that Daniela gave, is that effective engagement actually helps with translating not just what the stakeholders are thinking, but their needs into the overarching goal and basic for strategy development. One of the key things that stakeholder engagement allowed in the developmental stage of a strategy is actually getting consensus. Consensus for stakeholders in the development and implementation of a strategy helps with how they invest, and it helps with how the government invests as well for the meaningful outcome that the strategy wants to do. So as everyone has heard before, traditionally this is usually done offline. Face-to-face meetings, focus group consultations, roundtable discussions, and it usually happens at various stages from the kickoff to the actual launch of a national strategy. And the dialogue actually helps a lot with trust and buy-in and ownership. And it's important to stress that that offline engagement, buy-in and ownership, even more crucial with the online engagement process. The various tools, Cynthia gave a really good overview of the tools that has happened. And what's important to probably note is these tools are not just necessary to engage with them at the beginning of the process or during the strategy development process. From our learning experience, constant engagement, even beyond, is what a lot of the member state stakeholders have asked for. Long after the OAS has finished a strategy, we'll often meet with stakeholder groups, and they would say to us that, how can we move beyond the limitation of offline consultation? How can we engage constantly with the government to see how they are implementing? Carolyn, at the beginning, she mentioned the whole CMM process and the examples that were given in Africa in terms of how that was done. But a lot of member states want to know that, okay, now that we have a strategy, now that we've done an assessment, how can we help to move our member states, I guess, maturity beyond what was stated there? one of the things that we could also consider is some of the benefits that Cynthia raised in terms of persons who are in the rural areas that weren't always able to come to the capital, can now engage once it is that they have online access. And we've already spoken to the challenges of that. So some of the practical things that we have done since COVID, just to share with the audience, and as I said, we're willing to hear other ways that we could engage, but some of the practical things that we've done is building a relationship with a government interlocutor is critical. It was critical offline and it's even more critical online, because that person is pretty much your coordinator, your face in the country. Being able to offer technical assistance sometimes still feels like a remote experience for some persons, because persons who offer technical assistance are often seen as kind of a drive-by experience where they come into the country, they stay for 5 days and they leave. Doing it online requires even more engagement. For some of our member states, we speak daily, for some weekly, bi-weekly. We try to have, once it is that we're engaged in any process that is a development of a strategy, implementation of a strategy, the OAS has been having regular meetings almost every day. And believe it or not, while some persons don't like it, even using our phones, WhatsApp, text messages, Teams, whatever it takes to actually ensure that the engagement is constant. We believe that it's even more critical now online. Another critical step, which is done on the offline process, which is still necessary in the online process, is establishing a working group in the national country. This national working group is your link to the stakeholder groupings that are there. So if you think about it, not able to be physically there, making phone calls or even supporting the government in those meetings, is recognizing that if it is that you have a working group, for example, you have a working group that has the central bank, it has the telecommunication authority on it, it has the Ministry of Energy or the regulator for that, so your utilities regulators on it. Naturally, they are linked to all the banks and credit unions. They're a natural link to all the energy and critical infrastructure persons that you need. That one person being on your working group is the person who can call in country and gather them. The other thing that's important with the online is still doing a kickoff meeting. Normally in country, you would have this huge event at the beginning of the process for engagement where there's a formal launch of everything and everyone comes and everyone gives speeches. While you may not be able to have that elaborate process, it's still important to have that kickoff meeting. That meeting that brings everyone together, that explains to everyone virtually what is going to happen, how we expect them to engage. And as a part of that process is actually telling them how you will engage, that a lot of the engagement would be by emails, a lot of it would be by online surveys. Some of it will be phone calls when necessary, interviews. Those who can't use Zoom, figure out what is the best mechanism for them. With any stakeholder engagement, it's important for your stakeholder to understand what is being asked of them. One of the previous speakers spoke about ensuring that the videos are on to the best of your ability. That's important because reading the room is something that we were able to do in person, where you could read the room when somebody's getting sleepy and you know that you may need a coffee break. There's no coffee break online. Although that one of the things that we've encouraged some of our stakeholders to do is to walk with your coffee if you can. Try to stay as involved and give the same type of breaks that is needed. You could take a 5-minute break. You could take a virtual coffee break. One of the other things that we've explored, which we've been able to do with some of our online engagement, is actually creating virtual coffee rooms. So we do like breakout rooms that persons could actually go into the breakout rooms, talk to each other outside of the plenary session that's happening, and actually meet each other and speak one-on-one. And for those of you who are able to do that with Zoom, it would require you having a moderator in those breakout rooms that can actually facilitate the discussions. And that helps with persons, just like Cynthia pointed out, who may not be able to say something in the larger room, but may have some thoughts outside of that that they can share with someone else. It often facilitates that. And more practical tips is sometimes we do that randomly. And sometimes we actually look at the stakeholder groupings and we'll send them to those breakout rooms so there's a natural discussion that would happen. And just to kind of sum all of that up is just 5 quick tips to think about stakeholder engagement, whether it be virtual or in person, is one, survey your stakeholders. have an idea of what it is that they need for their national cybersecurity strategy, have an idea of what tools and resources they can bring to the process. Some of them may have tips, some of them may have practical experiences that would fall part of it. Some of them have initiatives and activities that you could consider that you could build on. Some countries, for example, if you're thinking of awareness, may have a Girls in ICT Day that they've been implementing for years, but never thought of it under the cybersecurity strategy umbrella. Survey your stakeholders as best as you can to speak with them. Prioritize as well your stakeholders' interest and their influence. Think about what's critical at the national level for them to be part of that process. See how they can contribute to the national goals and the vision that you've set up for your strategy. And also map your stakeholders so you can see the level of engagement that you need for each of them. Some you may need to just give updates as your strategy is being developed. Some of them you need as a critical stakeholder for consultation, a part of the strategy process, who will give input, whose names actually have to be in the document. So if you think about that, what's the difference between the two? You may have persons who are part of a small school that you may have as part of your keeping aware, just at least they can be, they'll know about it, they're in a community that you want to outreach. But then you might have the Ministry of Education that actually gives this small school the tools that they need to engage. They will be a critical part for consultation to inform your strategy more regularly. Another tip would be communicate actively and regularly. Stakeholders really don't like, at the end of consultations, they usually say to us, we're not going to hear from the government after this. And you try to encourage them as a organization to say to them that, no, sometimes it's really that they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough human resources. But think about taking the time to either send regular email updates once a month, once every 2 months, follow up on some of the ideas that they gave you during the consultations to let them know if it was incorporated in the strategy or if it was incorporated in your implementation plan. And I think the last thing I would probably want to point out as a good tip is to find various means of online tools. Cynthia gave you quite a few, but there's no one-stop shop. Different stakeholders engage differently. Some may respond better with a engagement hub or portal where they can write tips, where they can write ideas. Colombia had incorporated that as a part of their strategy development process. Others may post things online and ask for feedback by email. We saw that with Belize and Costa Rica in their strategy development. Some other countries did that in the Caribbean as well, to just ensure that the engagement, the stakeholders feel that they're a part of it. And giving feedback at the end, I think, as well to them is a critical step. So on that note, Dan, I think I'm going to stop and hand the floor back to you so we can have the discussions.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Kerry. Yeah, you touched upon so many important tips and insight. But yeah, I would like to highlight what you just said about there not being a one size fits all, and that there will be different tools and different stakeholders might respond better with different tools. So we need to sort of keep ourselves open to that and those different platforms and the different value that they will bring. I think what you were saying, and because you mentioned the example of Belize, I would like to tell you all a little bit about our engagement in Belize. So with support from the UK Foreign Office and in partnership with the OAS, we were able to support at GPT the development of Belize's first national cybersecurity strategy. And the main challenge we had when we started engaging there was a lack of engagement really from civil society groups. And the first reaction that we got from them was, what value we add to this process? So isn't cybersecurity quite technical? And we're talking about groups here that were focused on different topics like women's rights, child protection, even the Scouts of Belize. And they were thinking, how is this relevant to us, and how is our expertise relevant to this process? So what we were able to do with UK support was to develop and deliver a training program to provide those groups with an introduction to cyber policy and really making the links between the cybersecurity strategy and their areas of expertise, and providing a space for them to discuss their priorities. So after the capacity building training, took place, several of those groups stayed engaged. And the point I want to make is that sometimes there will be a need for building capacity of stakeholders so that they can engage meaningfully in a process, but that's worth it. And there's value in that. And then something else that I'd like to bring up as an example of good practice that I think Cynthia and Carrie-Anne mentioned before was that we were able to provide support to these organizations who, some of them were not in Belize City, which is where the consultations were held. So they wouldn't have been able to attend the consultation events, but they were able to, because of the travel support that we were able to provide as part of the project. And so nowadays, you know, we've now got this tool and the opportunity to do online consultations. And I think just wanted to highlight how that can also be an opportunity. You know, that before we might have needed travel support to be able to get those groups to engage meaningfully, and now we can do that through taking these consultations virtually. So just wanted to add that example. And so thank you to all our wonderful speakers for those initial interventions. And before we open the floor to questions, I just wanted to kick off the conversation a bit more by asking some questions. And I know we've talked about sort of the how and the challenges and how to overcome some of those challenges, but I wanted to ask a question and to sort of take it back to the basics, which is, what is, in your opinion, the value of stakeholder engagement in cyber policy making processes? So obviously, because of the focus of this webinar, I presume that pretty much everyone who's here agrees that engaging stakeholders is important and it adds value in policymaking processes. But I want to tease out, perhaps be a bit more explicit into what are those different types of value add. So I'm gonna let my speakers kick off. I don't know if anyone particularly would like to take the floor first. Maybe Ntabi, would you like to kick off? So coming from an academic center, how do you see the value of engaging stakeholders in these processes? I would also ask, if possible, for speakers to turn on your cameras now that we've gone through the individual interventions, so that we can all see each other and our wonderful audience can see our faces. So yeah, sorry, Ntabi, go ahead.
Okay, so the main benefit of stakeholder engagement is to ensure that the policy is addressing the correct thing, they're addressing the right problems for the country. Stakeholders are always in a position to know what challenges are out there, which the officials in government may not always be aware of. And it gives credibility to the rest of the policy process that the government will be pursuing. I think that's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Geraldine, from your government perspective, how do you see stakeholders adding value?
Well, Tabi has highlighted something I was going to highlight on, but just to add on to it is during these cyber policy making processes, having experts, they identify those gaps, and through that process, different stakeholders are able to learn from each other what has worked, what is needed. So that's why I think, in my opinion, it's important to have this stakeholder engagement. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Cynthia, I know you touched on this quite a lot on your intervention, but just wondering if there's anything else that you would like to add in terms of value.
I would just reiterate the buy-in aspect, that how important it is for policy to be effective, that people buy into it, and people just naturally buy into to things that they had some role in helping to create, something that they know, even if it doesn't meet all the things they wanted, if they were part of the process, at least they know that what they wanted was heard, what they needed was heard, and that there were reasons that things went a different way because they were part of those discussions. So for me, aside from the opportunity to add expertise, excuse me, buy-in is the single greatest advantage.
Yeah, wonderful. Carrie Ann?
I think awareness as well. One of the things that always comes up in the discussions is a lot of stakeholders weren't even aware how cybersecurity affected what they do and why it's so important. And the fact that we try to demystify cybersecurity strategies when we have our workshops to not let people think it's just a techie thing. Like it's not just the technical side, but that education is a part of it, civil society, the elderly, and it's not just thinking about cybersecurity as a technological solution, but to start educating persons that it's a people solution. The number one threat sometimes for cybersecurity is the person behind the screen, the monitor. And we try to educate persons that if you click, the threat becomes real. If you don't click, the threat isn't real any at all. So it's, I think education and awareness is a key thing for engaging them. It's a teaching process, and we try to teach when we have stakeholder engagement and not just do strategy development.
I really like that. I really like that. Thank you, Carrie Ann, and thanks everyone. I'm just looking at the chat to see if we've got some questions, and I think so far we've got one question from someone talking about the link between stakeholder engagement and how it aligns with cyber diplomacy, and how should or could it be developed to regulate cyberspace. Well, I guess, you know, it's the link between stakeholder engagement, and we're talking about national cybersecurity strategies, particularly in policy, but there is obviously a link with cyber diplomacy. And how do you see that link and perhaps that collaboration, and how do those different processes fit? So the national policymaking processes with international and global processes around cyber diplomacy and general international cooperation. So I'm going to see if any of the speakers would like to go first.
I'll probably jump on it only because what's been happening this week, I think it's a timely question. Just yesterday, they had the dialogue with civil society groups and non-state governmental actors on the open-ended working group on cyberspace topics. And I think what's important is for persons to recognize that with cyber diplomacy, a lot of it is really your diplomat representing the national's view, the nation's view on a topic. And you can either, one of the best things to do is to have that stakeholder engagement before you present that national view, and seeing how what you say internationally and the commitments you're giving of your government will impact your stakeholders at the national level, because many of those things have to be implemented at some point, whether it be by legislation, practical activities that the stakeholders are impacted has to be engaged. So I think it's important to consider that the idea of translating that involvement, we're seeing it at the UN level and seeing how it's impacting some of the decisions that will form part of the open-ended working group report. And I've always encouraged our member states to ensure that that kind of dialogue happens nationally as well, to inform the national's position, the nation's position before they go to the UN.
I would add something to that too, if I could, just sort of on behalf of our State Department sponsors. I think one of the advantages maybe, or one of the intersections between stakeholder involvement and cyber diplomacy is the opportunity to kind of expand perceptions of particular kinds of risk into the international arena, and help introduce opportunities for partnerships like Carrie Ann was describing, to address things like cybercrime or cyber-enabled crimes like trafficking, the way that establishing common security standards in a region can help increase investment, helping to identify those international standards and extend them, at a national level. I think it can help countries find commonalities in areas that they ordinarily, maybe they don't have a whole lot of basis for cooperation, but because cyberspace crosses all boundaries and all industry sectors and different types of economies, it can provide an intersection point, a point for opening some diplomatic dialogue that can maybe later be extended to other, other areas.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you for that. And just to mention that I just dropped on the chat a link to our hub that we've put together at GPD around the UNGA First Committee processes, and we've been engaging in that process, in particular coordinating with other civil society groups to bring civil society and other non-governmental actors' perspectives to those processes. So if you are interested, feel free to check it out. But yeah, agree with your perspectives around the need to sort of link these two and sort of see how those international commitments can be an opportunity to then leverage in our countries. So I also see another comment, so from Nigel, saying it would be excellent to see your work highlighted at the IGF later this year, and the workshop calls is soon to be launched. So that's a really, really great point to add for anyone who perhaps hasn't involved so far with the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, and it is a multi-stakeholder space. So having specific workshops and different sessions and sort of side events is always a really, really great opportunity to coordinate and to bring these discussions to that space. So we'll definitely be sure to share that call for workshops once it's launched. So thank you, Nigel, for that comment. I see that we've got a question from someone in the audience asking, how can we create cooperation between stakeholders in countries that are politically unstable? So I'll see if any of our panelists today would like to take the floor first. I guess, it is an interesting question in itself. So perhaps not countries where there's political instability, but I think, Cynthia, you had mentioned perhaps where stakeholders don't necessarily get on there, or there isn't trust already built in, and we are sort of starting from scratch and trying, to build that trust. So you touched upon that a little bit, but perhaps, if any of you have specific thoughts and that you would like to share around how could we foster those cooperation and those relationships between stakeholders where perhaps there's some political instability. So
I would add one thing to what I mentioned earlier based on some experience with a couple of countries. Sometimes when the government itself is not very functional, like in its interagency relationships or something like that, or there's frequent elections, or there's frequent, overturning of change out of personnel or that kind of thing. One way to work around that is to identify what elements of the society are stable. And often that may be civic groups or even churches or schools or things like that. There can be opportunities to engage at that level and get initiatives started that are not, not tied to a particular political administration or a particular set of leaders that they can just reconnect with each new set of leaders that come in. That's easier for us as the international community to do than it is for those internal government elements themselves. But even within those governments, often it's the case that only the upper leadership, turns over, and that there is still a possibility to continue work at the middle management layers. So, kind of working to establish an enduring connective structure with those career bureaucrats or career government employees, where that's possible, that can help.
Yeah, no, completely agree with that. Would anyone else like to comment on that question?
I think
Otherwise,
just to build on what Cynthia said, I think that thinking about some of the, just like she said, in terms of thinking about those institutions that don't really have that turnaround because of the political influence is critical. And one of the things that we try to do is to build up the capacity of those persons within those organizations that are like the legacy that kind of tie from one administration to the next. And also thinking about your stakeholders in terms of what value do they bring. Sometimes it's not good to bring everyone into the same room. And one of the things that we have done with stakeholder engagement is that where you think there may be animosity among stakeholder groupings is we divide them, not just by sector, but we have some groups who'd rather just meet by themselves. And sometimes you see this more when there's no animosity, you see this more with probably intelligence groups, but you'd also want to see it in terms of when you recognize that that's an issue in the country is to start taking them separately and still try to see how best their input can feed into the wider process as the implementer or the person who's on the outside facilitating the discussions.
thank you for that, Carrie-Anne. And I think we've also got a comment from Falake, who's my fellow AB member with the GFCE, and she's talking about how cooperation can play a big role, and it might help when other countries see the strides that neighbors are making, and how the pandemic has shed more light on the need for ICT development and cybersecurity. And these conversations are now being had even in countries that are unstable. So in some cases, it may well be used as a political bargaining chip. And I completely agree with that. And yeah, I would also say, let's refer, to some of those international commitments and engagement from countries in international spaces, and then sort of build on that and leverage that in that national engagement. So yeah, thank you for that comment, Falake. And we've got another question about, yeah, sorry, Cara.
Oh, yeah, there was one question for earlier in the other chat. I'm just going to read it out.
Yeah, please.
So the government implemented a working group. However, it was not really representative, as it was with a direct selection of only close groups. How can we ensure that the participation is truly representative of society, and that the risks that are mitigated are those that the society actually needs?
That's a really good question, and I think it goes back again to some comments that have been raised around mapping and sort of really mapping the entire landscape of stakeholders, and not just only inviting closer groups or the groups that have been engaged in a process before, like the usual suspects, so to speak. That's a really good question. So let me go to our panelists to see if anyone has any thoughts around that. I know, Carrie-Anne, you've supported the development of working groups and task forces and different multi-stakeholder initiatives in Latin America. So do you have any thoughts around, how have you faced that, and how do you encourage that diversity when working with the leading government to develop and form that group?
I mean, one of the things we start off by telling any of our member states when we engage that having a group like that, or at least a list of stakeholders that we can engage in, is critical. And I think one of the benefits that a regional body has is our ability to convene. So we often say to them, if you can't convene, allow us to convene. And even having a session where we can have all the stakeholders in a room where we can actually inform them what's happening. And the OAS takes a greater lead in being that neutral interlocutor between the government and these various groups that sometimes feel disenfranchised. We try to leverage on that. We always tell people that for us at the OAS, every member state, as small as they are, as large as they are, has a voice. And when we think about multi-stakeholderism, we encourage that in everything that we do. And even with groups that are disenfranchised, we try to be that facilitator. If you think about some of the other missions that we do in the OAS on more the political level, the peace accord for Colombia, different things that we engage in for Guatemala, Nicaragua, it's not something that's unfamiliar to us. And what we try to do is just to be that neutral facilitator. We don't take sides, but what we try to encourage is that facilitating that oftentimes is difficult. So engaging with an international body like the OAS or like whatever regional that you're in that has that facilitation, it's a good way to approach it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tabby, do you have maybe any thoughts, you know, coming from an academic center and you've been deploying the CMM model, how do you face those challenges when you want to foster ownership and buy-in from the government and, you know, get them to sort of lead on the process? How do you encourage that broad mapping of stakeholders so that the relevant stakeholders come to the table?
Thank you, Daniela. The way we communicate with the host government when we do the CMM, we already provide a guide and information sheet that shows the recommended list of stakeholders that have to be invited. And before, well ahead of time, there's an exchange between us and the host on the list of the stakeholders that they have indeed invited. And sometimes we identify that some groups may seem to be missing from the list they have provided, and we encourage them to add the ones that we see that they're missing, but sometimes they end up still not being there because of logistical challenges or other challenges of communication between the host and those stakeholders. I think Geraldine might have an idea of what happens sometimes so that some of the stakeholders end up really not being able to show up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tabby. Do you want to come in, Geraldine, on that?
Yes. Well, when it comes to now, like since we're having I'll give an example when we're conducting the CMM review, because of the change in having to do it online, logistic issues, as Tabby has highlighted, but that was one of the mostly it was logistic issues that brought issues for some of the stakeholders not being able to come to participate in the online review. So we would have expected a bigger number if we had an in-person meeting, but due to that shift, and some people were not yet familiar with the online platforms, and also timing was also another issue. So those are just some of the challenges.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Geraldine. And yeah, just to bring up that in the toolkit that I was talking about before in our guide, we've come up with it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a list of different types of stakeholders that should be involved in the development of national cybersecurity strategies. And we found that in particular, when it comes to civil society and non-governmental stakeholders, there was a need to sort of break down the different categories and like the different types of civil society groups that there exist, because civil society is in itself such a broad group, and like it brings such a diverse set of skills, and there will be groups that have different expertise and different skills. So referring to just civil society as a whole or non-governmental stakeholders can sometimes make that mapping and that identifying of stakeholders a little bit daunting. So obviously it's not an exhaustive list, and there will surely be more, and it will depend on the local context, but hopefully it's a useful list to sort of to have a look and start from when doing that mapping. So feel free to check that out. There's another question in the chat around strategies that the speakers have found successful to bring a broad range of stakeholders to the cybersecurity policy development table. So in doing assessments, we have found that stakeholders tend to opt to bring their technical specialists to the discussion rather than senior executive or policymakers. And I think we've started touching upon that. And I think, Carrie-Anne, you were mentioning a bit about this from your perspective, but I would be interested to hear, from the speakers, how do you get that buy-in, and how do you get, perhaps more senior level officials to engage and to want to participate in a process? How do you manage to foster that?
Okay, I'll go first. My experience with this kind of exercises is that the moment the language seems technical in the invitations and the communication around the engagement, the people who are non-technical tend to shy away. So we have to try as much as possible to demystify the issue of cybersecurity so that anyone understands that cybersecurity is not necessarily a technical topic. There is a whole lot of things that can be done around cybersecurity that are not technical, but which people need to know about, especially policymakers. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to add to what Tabi has said. Just from experience, it goes back to the language in the invitation letter. And also when you're having that session, make sure that you are you change the language. It's not too technical. You invited your policy makers or your senior officials, and everyone within that session is also at that level, and they're talking the same language. So that's, I believe, a very good strategy that has worked for us. Yes.
Yeah, language matters and framing matters. So yeah, I completely agree. So Cynthia, perhaps any thoughts from you?
I lost my mute button there for a second. Sorry about that. I think helping to focus on, a couple people have made the point earlier that that cyber isn't just this geeky IT shop thing. We have the advantage when we go into a country, typically we are going in with the State Department or USAID. So we're already kind of, we have access already to the policymakers. But we do make a point when we do a stakeholder engagement event, to ask for what we want. We ask for instance, 2 people from each agency, where one is a fairly senior policymaker and one is someone who has some technical background. And we do focus early on in our engagements in making those connections to what cyber enables in a ministry, in an economy, in a government, so that the policymakers see themselves and their interests represented in cyber in a way that they don't just see a bill, they don't just see someone's going to impose standards that are not important and waste my money. They don't just see it that way. They see it as, these are the things that will help me, grow the economy faster, attract investment, extend my services, do those things. And we try very hard to really keep the discussion in those terms, because the technical people will follow along. I mean, they will see how their tech applies to that. So it's more about trying to help the non-tech policymakers understand why they should care.
Perfect, thank you. Carrie-Anne, any thoughts from you?
Oh, no, I think everybody said, yeah.
Yeah, they've covered a lot. I can see that we've only got a few minutes left. So I'm going to check with Caro whether we have received any further questions from the audience. I'm looking at the chat.
No
I
further.
don't see anything new. Okay, so great. So we've only got 6 more minutes left. So I would like to invite the speakers today, our experts, to, if there's any final thought that you would like to share with the community today around these topics, feel free to go ahead. A 30-second, I guess, elevator pitch. If we want people to take something away from today's session, what would it be? I know it's a bit of pressure, but who would like to go first? Cynthia, I see you're unmuted, so can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, sure. Okay, 30 seconds. So I would suggest that as kind of a takeaway for how governments and us and we can help with stakeholder engagement, leadership is super important. If we can engage the leadership in a country and have them add the weight of their voice to what we need to do, help them understand why it's important, then they can bring lots of other people along. And then what we just talked about with helping connect cyber to the goals that people already have, help them understand that cyber isn't a thing you do for cyber's sake. It's something you do for the sake of your national security, your economic security, the ability to extend your mission and services. And by doing that and helping people find common goals and understand common risks, then you can bring those stakeholders together toward making progress. How's that? 30 seconds, that's pretty close.
That was pretty close. So that was really impressive. Thank you. Tavi, can I call you next? Oh, Kerry, yeah. No, go ahead.
No, because what Cynthia said, it made me smile. So just to continue on that vein is, we always say that no two persons are alike, and I think it's the same with your stakeholders. And it takes a lot of effort sometimes to kind of think about your stakeholders, what their needs are and how you engage. And I think thinking about each of them and having a unique strategy for each of them and where you can group them together, but it pays off in the long run because they will begin to trust you and not have resentment towards you. So sometimes we go with a cold email to our stakeholders and they're like, who are you? Like, I don't know who you are. But building up and thinking about your stakeholders and having unique strategies, and that includes even our policymakers. In countries, sometimes we fly in just to speak to our permanent secretary if our member state need us to. So each stakeholder might need individual attention, or they may be okay in a group setting. So just think about your stakeholders and build a relationship just like you do with anyone and maintain it.
Excellent, I love that. Tavi, can I come to you next?
Yes, thank you. When we think about stakeholder engagement, we should think about it as an activity that takes time. So it shouldn't be a matter of just ticking boxes. We need to give it the amount of time that it requires for it to be effective, among the things that my colleagues have already pointed out. Thank you.
I like that. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I've heard that phrase, and I think it's really it really applies. Geraldine, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Okay, yes, I believe the previous presenters have kind of highlighted everything, but maybe just maybe to retaliate this is that it's important to learn from each other, because what works for maybe this sector or for this stakeholder can actually work for me. So it all goes back to learning from each other. That's my brief.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So we unfortunately have run out of time for today's session, but we've touched on very, very important topics, and we've touched on the why and the value of stakeholder engagement and the buy-in and legitimacy and better implementation that it can bring. We've talked about the how and the need to have clarity of the landscape and understand who your stakeholders are, and the rule of thumb, when in doubt, be inclusive and involve those groups. Like Kerry-Ann just said, engage your stakeholders properly and bring out the best in them, and really learn how to engage with each stakeholder, as they might need a different dynamic. We talked about demystifying cybersecurity as being just a technical issue, use the right language to convey really how cybersecurity involves so many different aspects, and it's not just the technical. The need for leadership as well, that's come up a lot. we discussed some pandemic challenges around accessibility and connectivity and challenges to engagement, and really the need to recreate some of the in-person elements to build trust and to get the most out of our virtual engagement. And yeah, and some of the opportunities that virtual engagement bring, like bringing actors who otherwise wouldn't have been able to meet, and expertise to the process that perhaps we wouldn't have brought otherwise. But also we're thinking about how can we keep this in the future once, you know, we're able to go back to in-person engagement. Let's not lose that. Yeah, and I think something that has come up a lot has been the need for transparency and clarity, and keep people engaged, keep your stakeholders engaged. And really, the last thing that I want to highlight is trust, and how trust is key to make inclusive processes work, but also how inclusive engagement helps build trust. So they really go hand in hand. So yeah, so it's past. I would like to thank my brilliant colleagues on the panel, and would like to thank everyone who has joined the session today. Thank you to the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center at Oxford, in particular, Carolyn, Philippa, and Liz, who made sure that everything went smoothly today. Do check out the other webinars that they will be running. They're super interesting. And as we said, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar, or at least some segments of it. So if you are interested, or you would like to share it with someone else who was unable to join today, do keep an eye out for that. And yeah, that is all for today. Thanks everyone, and goodbye. Have a good day, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.